I used to love the silence of winter. To me, it meant peace and a chance to get away from the noise of the city. But after what I experienced last year at the Blackwood Mountain Resort, silence is the most terrifying sound I know. Because in the absolute quiet of a snowed-in hotel, you can hear things that no human being was ever meant to hear. I'm 24, and last November I took a job as a winter caretaker for a high-end resort that shuts down completely from December to March. The pay was incredible, and the only requirement was that I stay on site to handle minor maintenance and keep the pipes from freezing. I was the only person for 50 miles. The nearest town was cut off by 10-foot snowdrifts, and the only way out was a snowmobile I kept in the garage. For the first 3 weeks, it was actually peaceful. I spent my days doing rounds through the massive, empty hallways and my nights watching movies in the staff lounge. But during the last week of December, the atmosphere changed. It started with the music. I was lying in my bed on the second floor when I heard a faint, tinny sound echoing through the vents. It was a ballroom waltz, the kind of music they play at weddings. It was distant but unmistakable. I figured it was just the wind howling through the old structure, or maybe a radio left on in one of the 300 guest rooms. I ignored it. The next night, it got louder. I followed the sound down to the grand ballroom on the first floor. The room was massive, filled with white-sheeted furniture that looked like ghosts in the moonlight. As soon as I pushed the double doors open, the music stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, like the room was holding its breath. I shined my flashlight across the floor, and that's when I saw it. There were fresh, wet footprints in the middle of the dance floor. Not boots, but bare feet. And they weren't water. They were a dark, thick crimson. My stomach did a slow roll. I followed the trail of blood, my heart hammering against my ribs. The prints led out of the ballroom, down the main hall, and straight to the service elevator. I checked the indicator lights. The elevator was currently sitting on the second floor, my floor. I ran up the stairs, my lungs burning, and burst into the second floor hallway. The elevator doors were hanging open. A single bloody handprint was smeared across the brass railing inside. The trail of red continued down the carpet, leading directly to the door of my own room. I didn't go inside. I pulled my pocket knife and backed away, staring at the door handle. That's when I heard the scratching. It wasn't coming from inside the room. It was coming from inside the wall, right next to me. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Then a voice, raspy and dry like sandpaper, whispered through the drywall, just inches from my ear. "You're doing a much better job than I did, but the hotel, it likes me more." I didn't wait to hear another word. I sprinted to the garage, jumped on the snowmobile, and drove into the blinding white storm. I didn't care about the cold. I didn't care about the danger. I just had to get away from that voice. The police did a sweep of the resort 2 days later when the storm cleared. They didn't find anyone in the rooms, but when they checked the maintenance crawl spaces behind the walls, they found a small hidden compartment behind my headbed. Inside was the previous caretaker. He had gone missing 3 years ago, and everyone assumed he had walked into the woods to die. He hadn't. He had been living in the vents and wall cavities the entire time, watching every caretaker that came after him. They found a collection of my hair, my missing socks, and a small notebook where he had recorded my daily routine down to the second. The most disturbing part? The music. They found an old battery-operated gramophone in the ballroom. It was set to play at exactly 2 a.m. every night. He wasn't just living there, he was performing for me. I never went back for my stuff. I don't care about the money. Now, when I'm in a quiet room and I hear the house settling, I don't think it's the wood expanding. I think about that hidden space behind my bed, and I wonder if he's still in the walls, waiting for the next person to keep him company. I used to believe that death was a finality, a clean break. But after what I saw in the dirt of my own backyard, I've realized that some things are better left in the ground. Because when you try to cheat grief, you end up inviting something into your home that was never meant to breathe again. Last summer, I bought a small, isolated fixer-upper on the edge of a dense forest. The price was suspiciously low, mostly because of a small, overgrown patch of land behind the tool shed that the locals called the garden. It wasn't for flowers. It was a makeshift pet cemetery where the previous owners had buried their animals for over 50 years. The soil there was strange, black, oily, and it always felt 10 degrees colder than the rest of the yard. I moved in with my dog, a 3-year-old German shepherd named Max. Max was my shadow. But 3 weeks after we moved in, Max chased a stray into the road and was hit by a delivery truck. He died in my arms before I could even get him to the car. I was devastated. In a moment of weak, blinding grief, I remembered what the neighbor had whispered about the soil in the back. He said the garden didn't like to keep its residents. I buried Max in that black, oily dirt at midnight. I didn't say a prayer. I just wanted my friend back. 2 nights later, I was woken up by a sound at the back door. Scritch, scritch, scritch. I opened the door, and there stood Max. He was covered in mud, his fur matted with dried blood and earth, but he was standing. My heart soared with a joy that completely blinded me to the wrongness of the situation. I washed him, fed him, and let him sleep at the foot of my bed. But Max wasn't Max anymore. He didn't bark. He didn't wag his tail. He just sat in the corner of my room, his cloudy, fixed eyes staring at me with a heavy, predatory intensity. He wouldn't eat his food, but I'd find the remains of small birds and squirrels scattered under the porch every morning, torn apart with a precision that didn't look like a dog's work. Then came the digging. One night, I looked out the window and saw Max in the garden. He wasn't digging for bones. He was pulling something out of the dirt that looked like a stack of old, rotted paper. I ran outside and grabbed the pile from him. They were Polaroids, photos of me as a child playing in a park I didn't recognize, with people whose faces had been meticulously scratched out. I had never seen these photos in my life. I had never even lived in this state as a kid. I looked at Max, and for the first time, I felt a wave of pure, cold terror. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the tool shed. I walked over to the shed and pushed the door open. The floorboards had been ripped up. Underneath, in a shallow trench, was a human skeleton, small, like a child, and next to the skeleton was a leather collar with the name Max engraved on it. I turned around, and Max was standing right behind me. His jaw was hanging open at an impossible angle, and his throat began to vibrate with a sound that wasn't a growl. It was a voice. It was a low, distorted version of my own voice. "Wapasko," he whispered. He wasn't my dog. My dog had died in that road. Whatever was standing in front of me was a vessel that the garden had filled with something else, something that had been waiting for a body to occupy so it could finish what it started 50 years ago. I didn't pack. I didn't grab my keys. I ran to the highway and didn't stop until I flagged down a passing motorist. I never went back to that house. I sold it for a loss to a developer who planned to pave over the entire lot. I hope they use a lot of concrete, because if that garden ever gets a chance to breathe again, I know exactly whose house it will come looking for first. I never used to believe that a house could have a soul. To me, a building was just wood, brick, and mortar, a shell to keep the rain out. But after spending 3 weeks in Blackwood Manor, I realized that some houses don't just sit on the land, they inhabit it. They breathe, they think, and they remember things that you've spent your entire life trying to forget. I'm 26, and last autumn I found a rental listing that seemed too good to be true. It was a massive 3-story Victorian mansion on the edge of a quiet town in Massachusetts. The rent was practically nothing, but there was a specific, legally binding clause in the lease. I was never, under any circumstances, to open the door painted in deep crimson at the end of the 3rd-floor hallway. The landlord didn't give a reason. He just said that some rooms are better left as memories. For the first few days, the house was just unsettling. The layout didn't make sense. I'd walk from the kitchen to the living room, but somehow end up at the foot of the stairs leading to the attic. I'd shut a window in the morning, only to find it wide open and freezing in the afternoon. But the worst part was the sound. At night, when the wind died down, the walls didn't just creak, they vibrated with a slow, rhythmic pulse, like a massive pair of lungs was expanding and contracting behind the wallpaper. By the 2nd week, the house started talking back. I was in the library when I heard a soft, muffled sob coming from the floorboards. It sounded like a child. I pressed my ear to the wood, and the crying stopped, replaced by a low, melodic humming. It was a lullaby my mother used to sing to me before she passed when I was 6, a lullaby I hadn't thought about in 20 years. The house wasn't just haunting me, it was digging into my head. Every night, the red door at the end of the 3rd floor seemed to get closer. The hallway felt shorter, the crimson paint looking wetter, as if it had been freshly applied. One night, around 3 a.m., the breathing in the walls became so loud it was like a roar. I couldn't take it anymore. I walked up to the 3rd floor, my hands shaking, and stood in front of that door. From behind the wood, I heard her voice, my mother's voice. She wasn't screaming. She was whispering my name, calling me into the room for dinner, just like she did when I was a kid. She mentioned a specific secret, a small toy soldier I had buried in the backyard of my childhood home, a detail no one else in the world knew. The dread was overwhelming, but the pull was stronger. I grabbed the cold brass handle and twisted. The door didn't just open, it felt like it was exhaling. But there was no room behind the door. There were no walls, no ceiling, and no floor. It was just a vast, infinite pit of absolute swirling darkness. It felt like I was looking into the throat of something ancient. From the depths of that void, hundreds of pale, translucent hands began to reach upward, clawing at the air, trying to find purchase on the doorframe. And in the middle of it all, I saw a face. It looked like my mother, but the proportions were all wrong. The neck was too long, and the eyes were just empty, weeping holes. I slammed the door shut and bolted it. The house let out a literal groan of frustration, a sound that shook the very foundation of the building. I didn't grab my clothes, I didn't grab my laptop. I ran down the stairs as the hallway began to stretch and warp, making the front door look miles away. I made it out, but I didn't stop running until I reached the main road. The landlord never called me for the rent, and when I tried to look up the property on Google Maps a month later, the entire lot was just a patch of gray, blurred-out static. I live now in a modern, glass-walled apartment. No basements, no attics, and definitely no red doors. But sometimes, when it's very quiet at night, I can still hear that rhythmic pulsing. It's not coming from my walls anymore. It's coming from inside my own chest. The house didn't just want me to stay. It wanted to become a part of me. And I'm terrified that one day I'll wake up and realize that I never actually left that hallway.